My name is Libby Willis, and I am a resident of Fort Worth. I'm also president of the Fort Worth League of Neighborhoods, although I'm speaking tonight only for myself. We will, however, provide to you the League's recommendations for regulating air emissions from gas drilling in Fort Worth. We provided those in early May to the city. We will provide those to you as well. First, I do want to thank you very much for being here in Arlington, near the heart of the Barnett Shale. It's almost like the cavalry riding into town for a lot of us. It's important to those of us in this region to have the input of the federal government regarding these very important air quality issues as they relate to gas drilling. Given our situation, it's even more important than ever that we have a federal Clean Air Act. From the beginning of the drilling in the Barnett Shale, we have not had, at either the local or the state levels, far-sighted planning or potential environmental impact studies before drilling began. So the federal government has been our only recourse in many instances. We need you to continue to study our situation with gas drilling and its impact on our air and water, and we need you to continue to improve your standards to protect the public. The city of Fort Worth is really behind the curve on this issue, environmentally speaking. As I said before, unfortunately, no environmental impact studies were ever conducted before drilling began in Fort Worth. We did not have the luxury that the citizens of New York State had when they had advanced environmental impact studies. Therefore, we cannot assume that what has been done over the past years has provided adequate environmental protections from the effects of gas drilling, because we have been in an unknowing atmosphere. The effects of gas drilling at this pace and at this level in this highly dense populated area are unprecedented. We are barely at 20% build out in Fort Worth, and we are facing another 4 to 5 more years at least of drilling at this pace to reach 100% build out. We must have a model today which forward predicts the 100% drilling build out so that we know now what we are facing and in the future in terms of impacts of drilling on the citizenry. I agree with the letter from the Natural Resources Defense Council and many other organizations recently sent to EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson that there's an urgent need for updated federal safeguards. As we are witnessing now in the Gulf of Mexico, the need for stronger regulatory oversight of oil and gas operations is crucial to ensuring sustained protection of public health and welfare. Families, communities, public lands, and wildlife habitat depend on this oversight for clean air. The EPA's review and update of the new source performance standards and the national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants present a critical opportunity to meet this need. And to this end, as the EPA moves to review and update air quality standards for oil and gas development, I urge you to respect the following principles. Number one is comprehensiveness. I urge the EPA to be as comprehensive as possible in reviewing and updating the NSPS and NESHAP, all sources of air pollution in the oil and gas sector, including exploration, production, processing, transmission, distribution, and storage, and all pollutants released by these sources should be included in any updated air quality regulations, regardless of the level of emissions or major or area source status. Although I understand that many individual sources may be small, on a cumulative basis, such sources are very large. The Act provides authority to control emissions from these smaller sources, and the public health imperative for doing so is clear. A comprehensive review should also address methane emissions, both to safeguard the climate and protect the safety of workers, communities, and the general public. The second principle I draw your attention to is full health protection. Protecting public health must be a cornerstone of the EPA's review and update of the NSPS and NESHAP. To this end, I strongly urge the EPA to consider prohibiting hazardous air pollutant emissions in certain circumstances, an authority available to you under the Act. At a minimum, the EPA must ensure that any residual risk standards promulgated under Section 112 reduce lifetime cancer risk from oil and gas operations to below 1 in 1 million, as intended by Section 112 of the Act. And on the subject of balance that we've heard about tonight, when it comes to natural gas fracking, all levels of government should tip the balance in favor of protecting the health and welfare of our citizens. Again, thank you for being here and for conducting this meeting. The citizens of North Texas who live in or near the Barnett Shale are counting on you to be sure the right measures are in place. And I want you to feel that pressure. We are counting on you. We need you to be sure that these regulations and measures are enforced so that natural gas fracturing does not damage our health or our communities. We're counting on you to hold the operators who are using outdated or environmentally unsafe practices accountable and to make sure they comply with safe drilling practices. We are counting on you to protect the public welfare and the public's interest. Thank you.
May I add one thing, and Linda Hanratty addressed this, and forgive me, but one of the things that people are touching on here is the cost of this, and I don't know how much you get into that with your regulations, but that needs to be borne by the industry. In a day and time where our local, state, and federal budgets are being hammered, the industry needs to bear that burden with an environmental impact fee which will address all of these issues, air, water, and land. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. The next speakers, Jeff Tatum and Bruce Cunningham. All right, we've got one. You are Mr. Tatum, or yeah, okay. Is Bruce Cunningham here? Bruce may have stepped out for a second, so in that case, we'll bring down Jimmy. Is it Hosh?
Yes.
Great. Go ahead, Mr. Tatum.
Good evening, and thank you very much for this opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. First of all, I want to say my name is Keith Tatum, and I pastor a local Baptist church called Friendship Rock Baptist Church, as well as I serve as the president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and also I chair a coalition of human rights organizations within Fort Worth called the One Accord Coalition. And we are greatly concerned about the environmental impacts the natural gas industry is having on our communities. In a real sense, this is a blessing in disguise because many of the concerns that are being discussed tonight are concerns that we've had historically within the African American community. Our communities have always been a waste dump for environmental issues, and now it appears with this burst of natural gas from the Barnett Shale and the approach that many in the industry are taking towards our neighbors in other communities, they're now beginning to feel our pain. Pain that not only impacted our neighborhoods, it's impacted our livelihoods as well as our children and communities. Far too often we see the impact of the environmental toxins within our children. We know that African American children, especially men, are 3 times more likely to be suffering from asthma and other types of allergies. And that suffering tends to impact their behavior, which subsequently means it impacts their behavior within school. And so a public health issue has now become a behavior issue in school, which consequently becomes a criminal justice issue within a much larger community. Not only that, we know the impact it's having on our women. Tarrant County is one of the highest in infant mortality rate in African American women, 3 times more likely in African American women than in many other communities. So we know that impact is happening. Not only that, some of my friends who are in academia, Dr. Edwin Grimes, who is the director and chair of the OBGYN department for John Peter Smith at the University of North Texas, says that the level of lead that's found in women who have birthing aids is grossly higher within our community, and they're not really trying, they don't understand what's happening. But we understand what's happening. Dr. Kathy Carielli and her husband, Roberto Carielli, and Dr. Kurtz over at the University of North Texas, who have been studying this issue and the disparities of what's happening within our communities many, many years, have the scientific data to prove that what's happening in the industry now has had a gross impact within our communities, because our communities have always been the waste dumps. The desperate treatment within the African American community, the other minority and poor communities, are really horrible. What has really taken me over the top and made me truly an advocate for change within our communities, not too recently, in fact in May, I was driving over to our church, and we service about 1,500 high-risk, low economic community people who live in a tax credit housing complex in a concentrated area. And right across the street, Chesapeake began to drill wells. And not like in other communities where they put up the barriers, the noise barriers and other things aesthetically to make it look nice. They decided to just pile dirt on top of dirt on top of dirt till it was about 40 feet in the air. And they were not going to move it until we decided to send a letter to the governor and to the Railroad Commission and others claiming environmental racism. And then Chesapeake came and met with us one time. We never heard from the governor. We never heard from the Railroad Commission. We never heard from any other regulatory bodies within our state and or our local community. But yet these kids have to walk by that place, and those mothers day in and day out, and no one seems to care. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Wrote a book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And I tend to believe that if Fort Worth is really going to be a community that cares about all, it must do a better job caring about the least of these. In fact, he once said very clearly, and I oftentimes quote him, he says, we're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny, and whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. And for some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be unless you are who you ought to be. The rich man can never be who he ought to be until the poor man is who he ought to be. In closing, I simply ask you all, because we can't get the help here, they have decided to put corporate wealth ahead of community health. They've decided to put greed over the human needs. And so I ask you very clearly, please protect the people and not their profit. Thank you very much.
Back in the 80s, I was first introduced in an economics course to the concept of transferring costs onto the